Hello everyone, and welcome to this first workshop session. This workshop will have a follow-up session 1 week from today at the same time and place. This workshop, as you know, is about public speaking skills, and more specifically, the importance of well-crafted introductions. Speech introductions are usually either overlooked or poorly prepared. But as we will see through these two workshops, it is vital that speech introductions are given adequate attention and preparation. So let's go to the first slide. So if we were to think about speech introductions, and if we were to think about public speaking in general and audience, what are the two most significant factors to public speaking success? Is it the speaker? Is it the content? Is it the topic? Is it the delivery? And then the second question we should think about is how can we explain these factors so we can understand what we as public speakers need to do? So what are these factors? And then once we know what they are, we need to be able to explain them, and by explaining them, we can understand them. And this way, we can do a better job as a public speaker. So the two most influential factors to consider as a public speaker are audience attention and time. Audience attention and time are two factors that truly influence the success of any speech, any public speaker's introduction or complete speech. So let's look at these two factors schematically in an XY graph so we can better understand them. If we better understand them, then we can actually see what we're doing as speakers. If we look at this graph, you'll see on the horizontal line, the horizontal axis X, we have time represented in seconds, from 0, 20, 40 seconds up to 160. And if you look at the vertical line, the Y-axis, you will see what's represented as the audience's attention. The audience's attention is at peak performance when we begin a speech. So in terms of time, we can start off understanding that the audience's attention is with us. But as time moves on, as you can see from this graph, we begin to lose the audience's attention. And there is, in a sense, a downward curve. There is at a point a leveling out, if you will, of the speaker's relationship with his or her audience, and at some point there's an upward spiral. But in general, we can say that the beginning of the speech is very important precisely because it's at that point you can catch the audience's attention. So what are, in a sense, the three effects that influence, or how can we see the speech curve with three different effects? Let's have a look at this schematically again. In an essay, we know that an essay is divided into three parts. In general, we can say an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. But in speech genre, it's a little bit different. In speech genre, we have what's called the primacy effect, which influences the beginning part of the speech. As you recall, in the XY axis, the beginning of the speech is where it all happens. Then we have the intermediate section, which is where the leveling out occurs, as you recall, and the recency effect, which is basically the end or as we conclude the speech. So if you'd like to think about it in terms of three effects, because we're talking about public speaking, not writing, then you can think of the primacy effect as the introductory section, the intermediate effect as the middle part, and the recency effect as the conclusion. Now let's move on to the graph and see how all this works out in terms of understanding the audience and thereby being more effective as a speaker on our side. So these three effects, as you can see, the introductory part is the primacy, the intermediate, which is the middle area or the body, and the recency. What we should notice here is that, as mentioned previously, the beginning of the speech is where audience attention is at peak performance, but it's at that point where it starts to sag. And then once we enter the intermediate level, it's when we get a leveling out. And then finally, as we move on into the concluding area, we get the recency effect. So there is a kind of spiraling up as we conclude in terms of the audience's attention. Now remember, it's the audience that makes the speaker, not the speaker that makes the audience. It's the audience we have to keep in mind when we want to become successful and effective public speakers. And that's why being able to write an introduction and master an introduction in the most effective way makes a big difference. Not so much for the speaker, but for the audience, because it's the audience that counts. So if we look at these three effects, the primacy, intermediate, and recency, together they make up what's called the serial position effect of a speech. The body of the speech, the whole area of the speech. And if we think about it, the two influencing factors that come into play throughout the whole speech are audience attention, X factor, audience attention, Y factor, and time, X factor. So to sum up, we have audience attention and time as the two central influencing factors, and the serial position basically explains how these influencing factors influence the audience's attention at the primacy level, at the intermediate level, and at the recency level. So we can understand there is a parallel between the audience's attention and time and how it's represented in terms of this graph. So what can we do as public speakers now that we understand that these are the influencing factors and the effects that occur during a speech? Well, let's begin and find out some interesting things on how we can become more successful public speakers, and by doing so, gain the attention of the audience and the audience's appreciation.